Hi there, and welcome to Claris Engage 2020. My name is Luke Rochester, and I'm going to be talking to you about an artificially intelligent app that I implemented at a factory for Mars here in Australia. So hearing that I'm Australian goes some way to explaining why you're going to have to listen to this terrible accent for the next few minutes. My background is in engineering and psychology. And I've got a business called One Business App, and actually I've done another session at this year's Claris Engage describing how you can integrate Siri into your own solutions. But today I'm going to talk to you about an actual implementation that I did. I won't focus so much on the development side of things, but more on the case study itself and what you can expect from the client side when you're implementing solutions like this. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for watching. So I've told you a little bit about myself. I think before I talk to you about the actual case study, the implementation, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the app that they were looking at. Now you can see plenty of other sessions that I've done, in fact even one that I did this year at Claris Engage, where you can find out a lot more about the app itself and how it works. But in essence, just for this little case study, it's important to know that it basically had key performance indicators on it, KPIs. Green meant that they're going well, red meant that they're going bad, arrows up, getting better, arrows down, getting worse. And the texture of the arrow, how dark or light it was an indication of the size of contribution it made to the business. Now, the one you see on the screen now would be an example for, say, a sales team. In this implementation, I can't show you the exact information due to intellectual property reasons and privacy, but in essence, it looked like this screen, but instead of seeing people in a sales team, they were looking at machines in the factory, and what you were seeing was the performance for each machine. And importantly, what we were able to do was predict performance for machines in the future, and indeed predict machines that were likely to break down, and therefore go and maintain or look after the machine before it actually had a fail. As far as the AI goes, we would let the engineers actually speak to the app. So they could click on the chat button and they could just say things like which machine is going to break down next, and the app would know based on who's logged in, which machines they're responsible for, and it would do a quick analysis and tell them which machine needs to be looked at next. One of the interesting things about using AI for this kind of thing is, as opposed to traditional means where you'd go off and do analysis about which machine to look at next, they also was able to look at other things going on inside the business. For instance, if you can imagine an example where you've got two machines about to break down, perhaps one of them has an excessive amount of stock, so it doesn't matter so much if the machine breaks down. The other one might be close to running out of stock, so it's critical that the machine doesn't break down. And the AI can just do a quick algorithm to work out which one's more important. And then when they say, which machine you should look at next, the AI can take that into account very simply and tell them to go off and fix the machine that's under more pressure for the business. So that's probably enough about the app itself. Let's now talk about the implementation and what happened at the customer site. Now, at the beginning, when I first started talking to them about artificial intelligence, you got all the kind of things that you're probably hearing when you go and bring it up with any of your clients, or indeed if you're an in-house developer, with other people inside the company. There's a few common things people will say, AI, we're not ready for AI, we don't even have enough data to do that, or it's all a bit of hype, it's no different to what we're really doing now, it just sounds different. Or maybe they're a little bit more encouraging. They think, AI is promising. It's just that we don't have enough time right now. And that's probably the most common thing I hear is everyone's time poor, everyone's busy, and they say, look, I don't have enough time to do artificial intelligence. I've got these other really pressing priorities that I need to work on. And this little image for me kind of summed up how it made me feel, because quite often when I'd say to them, what are the things you're working on? What are the things that are taking up all of your time? What's the high priority stuff? It would turn out that it's, often things that I could really help them with if we just use some of the machine learning and algorithms that AI links to help you analyze data. So this picture of, the people pulling these rocks without using a wheel, I kind of felt like the guy at the back there saying, but I've got these wheels, if only you had enough time, you could help you out. Another common thing that I would hear is that, the organization's really large, but our department's not big enough, or in some cases for smaller companies, I don't think the company's big enough. They might think that they've got data, but it's dirty, and our first order of priority is to clean the data first, and then we'll get to AI later. And in fact, this happened during this implementation. And just the quick approach that I took in this particular case was to say to them that they had it around the wrong way, because if they wait for their data to be perfectly clean, they'll never use any kind of technology, advanced technology. Whereas if we start building the solution, and indeed we had meetings with the directors asking engineers about why their machine was performing so bad, and the engineer might say, oh no, that's just because I haven't filled the information in properly. Well, you can imagine the director would say, okay, well, next week I want to see it filled in properly. So it was kind of like this push for people to clean their data up because they realized it was getting used for something really important. Quite often they talk about AI costing too much money. There's a lot of open source free stuff out on the internet, or even really low cost stuff, and in most of the projects I've worked on, the return on investment's there almost immediately. Once your thing's gone live and you're up and running, within a matter of weeks, you get your return on your investment. So from my experience, it hasn't really been a cost issue. And again, people talking about gaps in their data or dirty data or something wrong with their data, and they want to fix that first before they do AI. So all this stuff on the screen, I hope, is probably similar to the kind of things you're hearing. It's all about data and hype and not enough time, basically. For me, none of this was new. I've worked in business intelligence for many years before working with artificial intelligence, and I've found from my own experience that if I try to drive projects from the bottom up, in other words, talking about the technology and what it can do for them, those projects fail. And in fact, Gartner's done some research supporting that this type of thing happens quite generally in the industry. If you try and push these projects from a technology perspective, make it bottom up, they will often fail. As we all know, if you make it business driven from the top down, so you get in my case, it was getting directors excited about it before going to the ranks, then they're more likely to succeed. And that's certainly what we did when we were at Mars. So I've done this several times. I've had a few fairly large scale projects where I've used the algorithms that were used in the machine learning algorithms for Mars. And there's just one example in Australia, when it had one of the largest, product recalls in the country's history. We used these to have a very big impact on Blackmores. Another time working for Unilever, just a matter of weeks, we were able to save millions of dollars, in the words of the regional director for sales and operations planning. But this one we're going to talk about today is about the project that happened at Mars, where again it's a similar kind of theme. We use these algorithms to predict things, and in this case we used artificial intelligence to help provide a conversational user interface to that data. So in the past, although when you start or before you start a project, you hear all these kind of things that I mentioned on the slide earlier. Let me show you some of the things I heard after the implementation at Mars, and you're going to hear some of these in the video that's coming up. So I'm going to show you a video of the client or the factory manager talking about the project. And if you listen to the words that he's using after the project's gone through, here are the kind of things that you hear. I love the fact that he starts his whole presentation with, I'd like to introduce you to iBen. That was the name they came up for the AI. It was called iBen. It's like Siri for your business. And I started using this catchphrase all over the company because I thought it was a really good simplification of the value we're adding. Imagine having Siri look at information inside your own business and how powerful that can be. And so we used that and he started it, and I kind of ran with it because I thought it was a great way of describing it. He was saying that some of the key things about it is it puts everybody onto the same problem, which is just kind of like the holy grail for many years of management consulting, is trying to get everybody working on the same problem will get you a long way. Improving visibility and transparency for everybody encourages teamwork. Full visibility means a single point of entry to one version of the truth. Again, things that many of you have been hearing probably for years, and how companies are striving towards that. Well, AI gives you the solution to that. Although one of the things that he made clear in this video coming up, which I really loved it, was that technology is not the solution. It's just the enabler. And I think that's really critical. And there's a lot of truth that comes from that. And some of that's explained in the video that I'm about to show of the client talking about it. And then some other kind of fringe benefits. The fact that people were curious, the fact that the program we're using was insightful and it was providing relevant information. It kind of got people interested in the project. And the fact that it was fun, and that we were able to talk to an AI, and that it was talking about facts and it wasn't people's opinions or rumors. It was based on, hardcore analytics that was happening in the background. And towards the end of the video, you're going to hear him say that the possibilities, in his case, it was for manufacturing, that gives him gives him goosebumps for the future. And I think that just shows the level of interest that we had in the organization. People weren't just looking at this project, they were thinking about the implications it has more broadly on the whole industry. And in one particular case, the director that I had put so much work into in the early days trying to get him interested in the project, really understood when he saw people using the app and people talking about the future performance of machines and having a dialogue with each other and with the app. He started to understand about the importance and the significance of artificial intelligence. So, taking words from the client, thinking about AI and linking it to solutions in Claris and FileMaker, I really think it is like having Siri for your business, but this is going to be put into much better words by the client himself. And so now I'll show you a video of the client talking about it. And again, when you hear him talking about IBEN, that's the name they gave to the artificial intelligence, the algorithm that I created for them. So without further ado, here's the client talking about it.
So let me introduce you to IBEN. So IBEN is your own personal Siri for the business. So if you want to know anything about your department, just ask a question. So that's kind of how we introduced it to the team leaders. And if I was to kind of summarize that, right, it's pretty much people deserve just to work in great places, who not only talk about people development, but also walk it. Technology just happens to be the enabler. And that's what how we positioned it. So as an outcome, what you kind of see now, so Jeff Wall, which Luke mentioned, so a supply chain director who's here with us today, walked into our daily operations meeting a little bit early, about 2 months ago. And he saw this and he took this photo. And what you see here is, the 3 frontline team leaders, they're kind of huddled around their iPhone, but you see that they're curious, they're talking to each other, they're showing each other different things. And in this actual example, so Tony, the one standing up, is our coding team leader. He was actually talking to the other guys saying, check this out. I didn't actually realize that this one flavor on this one coding pan takes an extra hour to code versus these other ones. And John, who's our reliability team leader, is going, I didn't know that either. So as an outcome of just that conversation versus the image that you saw before is they're slowing down, they're talking about facts, not stories, they're sharing insights with each other. And then all of a sudden you have this group of people all just working on the same problem, not on separate problems. And to me, that's actually really exciting because as you look at their faces and their gestures, they're showing that curiosity and they're showing that excitement. And for me, I kind of think, geez, what's possible, right? So now we're up to the stage where every frontline leader in our factory has this tool, has this capability to ask any interesting question and get an interesting answer back. And what this does is it provides full visibility and transparency to anybody in the organisation. But what it encourages is teamwork. And to me, actually kind of, again, thinking of that is you can interact through voice. So I'll ask a question. If it's loud because we're in manufacturing, I can text the question. Or as what Luke showed, I can just have a look at the graphs and that can kind of steer me in the right direction. So as an outcome, so as a result, within 10 months, the factory has been able to move the dial on efficiency by 13%. So they're numbers that we have never been able to achieve, let alone in 10 months, right? And really what excites me about being able to share this story with you is that now that we're up to kind of release 3, which is what Luke mentioned, the AI is only going to get smarter. So it's fairly basic at the moment because we've only just created it, but it's going to get smarter. And as it gets smarter, who knows what the possibilities will be and where we'll be in 10 months. Because people will be asking questions we've never asked or thought to ask. People will be solving problems that we've never thought to solve. And that's what kind of gives me goosebumps here just kind of talking to you about it. It's from a future of manufacturing, that to me is quite exciting.
So you've heard now from Fernando. He was the factory manager at Mars. Now, one of my favourite phrases that was the takeaway for me for the time that I spent there with Fernando was when people asked us what we were doing, we just summarized it like this. We just said, we're creating an app that's like having Siri for your own business. Now, just in terms of a bit more detail on what we actually did, we linked a chatbot. And the one we used was Dialogflow. At that time, it was called API.ai from Google. They've now changed the name to Dialogflow. And effectively, when you speak a sentence, this service would extract the words, like the nouns, adjectives, and from your sentence, it would create a query that you could then use to go and query the data. So the way it basically worked, you have a user. Over there on to the left, you've got a user who would be using an app, and they'd use the microphone on their phone to speak their question. API.ai platform or the Dialogflow platform would take that verbal query, turn it into text query, and from the text query, I'd work out the intent. From the intent, we could go off and run another query on the data. Now, when I first built it, I used MySQL on Google Cloud. So we converted the intent into a MySQL query. But then in later versions of it, I worked with Johan Hedman, and we created a query in FileMaker server. So we went from, we connected Dialogflow, Google's Dialogflow to FileMaker server. And then in even a more recent one, in the other session that I've done this year at Clarus Engage, I talk about how I've actually embedded the query into the FileMaker Go app itself. So you've got all different ways of doing it. But basically, in the way chatbots work, you speak your sentence, the verbal is converted into text, the text is converted into intents and context and entities. You then query your data, and it all comes back the other way. At the bottom there, you have actionable data. In our case, it would action the FileMaker Go scripting to put on a certain layout on the user interface. So that's your output, and if you wanted to, you could have in a Siri voice the answer or a sentence spoken back to the user. So that's basically how a chatbot works and how the implementation that we did worked. Now, I've picked up some slides that I presented in 2014. I actually did a session on business intelligence, but the BI stack is almost identical to the AI stack. So I'm going to use those slides here again now to talk through what I did out at Mars. Now, here's your traditional BI stack or AI stack. You've got data sources at the bottom coming from multiple different systems. You need to extract them from the different systems, transform and load it into one data warehouse where you can then do the analysis and you can distribute the answers to various user interfaces. What's great about Clarus FileMaker, and back then it was just called FileMaker, is you could use FileMaker to connect to all these different external data sources. So there's tools within FileMaker that help you to connect. And these days we have Clarus Connect, which makes it even easier to do through APIs. You can then use FileMaker calculations and relationships and scripting to transform the data after you've extracted it from these different solutions. And then once you've extracted and transformed it, you can load it into a data warehouse. And of course, FileMaker Server is a great database, so online database. So you can use FileMaker to store the data warehouse. You have to set it up properly, so you've got to get some good indexing going and don't have too many relationships inside the data warehouse itself so that it operates nice and quickly, even on large amounts of data. You can then do analysis using FileMaker charts or FileMaker summaries. And now with the JavaScript plugins, you can get all sorts of fantastic tools to do analysis inside of your solution. You can then distribute it to either Mac devices or Windows devices, and now with web-enabled stuff, you can have it on any web-enabled device. And then and this is probably the most important thing of all, is you can control almost every pixel on your layout with FileMaker. That's what I love, is the ability that I've got to build a conversational user interface. So while you're having the discussion with the chatbot, you can intercept different parts of the discussion and show something relevant on the screen, relevant to the discussion or the question that the user has just asked. That's the really exciting stuff for me when I'm building these solutions. And then finally, because you're using FileMaker, it's great for filling in gaps. So for instance, if you've got a solution where you are talking about sales and you've got all your sales orders and sales invoices, but you need the budget, from the sales manager. If you're using a traditional ERP system, it can be a real hassle to get the budget into the ERP system. But if you're using FileMaker, it's very simple. Just get them to put it into an Excel spreadsheet and upload it. Even upload it once a week, or however often you want to upload the budget. So it's very easy to create these little tiny apps that fill all the gaps for you to give you a whole end-to-end BI stack, or AI stack in our case. If we spread that out a little bit, there's something that happened in this implementation that I want to talk to you a little bit more about. Before I do that, I just want to show you, this is the typical kind of diagram you'd see if you do a Google search or look on Wikipedia for BI stacks or AI stacks. It's typically got these kind of components in it. What they're missing is the most important one, which are the users. And as you saw from Fernando, the factory manager at Mars, he talked a lot about the importance of the users and how that's really the key piece in this whole thing working. I think the other person that's pretty critical, and it's probably the very person that's watching this video now, it's the enabler. KW there stands for knowledge worker. So for that person in the middle, that's the knowledge worker, who is your typical Claris FileMaker developer. This is someone who's good with computers, but also good with people or business processes. In the case at Mars, that was me. So I was the person that kind of bridged the gap between the director, the factory managers, and the actual data itself. And I think that's probably going to be you watching this video right now. You're one of the critical pieces in the puzzle. And for me, the little thing that I had to solve was when they were talking about not having any data and it need to be cleaned, turned out that they had a long history of downtime data in Excel spreadsheets. So I ended up writing a FileMaker program that extracted or imported the data from all of these spreadsheets, and then transformed it so that it was all exactly the same format in a database schema, and then loaded it into one file, which was my data warehouse. What was interesting about that little part of the project was the number of spreadsheets. So I had years and years of downtime data across multiple departments, and I ended up adding up the number of spreadsheets that we had was 14,000 Excel spreadsheets. So there was no way you could manually get in there and pull the data out. You needed to write a program to do it. And I was able to do the whole thing with FileMaker. I wrote programs that went and looked at all the different directories, sucked up all the Excel spreadsheets, converted it into a unified format so that all I had at the end of the day was just this huge data warehouse. Now that program went across 5 years worth of data. So the first time I ran it, or the loading of all of the historical data, took many hours for the program to run. But then after I'd loaded up, done the initial load, I only needed to update the last week of data. So it was very easy. Each week, once we went live, all we did was add another week's worth of data out of these Excel spreadsheets, and we let them keep it in the Excel spreadsheets. So that little piece was what enabled us to break the back of a lot of the problems you hear people talking about, not enough data or it's dirty. I was kind of like, look, leave that with me. I can see there's some data in Excel spreadsheets. I'll get that to work. I'll put that to a data warehouse, and that'll be our starting point. And then once we had that as a starting point, and because we had a lot of people looking at the information, the people in the organization started improving the quality of the data themselves. So I'm hoping that raises a question for you, which is, if you want to engage in this, what's the kind of process you might take to get started with AI? When I do it, the first thing I like to do is I call it a boot camp, an AI boot camp. And the audience is not the lower level worker bees, the people that are going to be doing all the work for you. They're not the audience. The audience are the executives and the managers, or if it's a small business, then it's the owner of the business. What you want to do is run a quick boot camp where you're showing them the possibilities of AI so that they realize there is this possibility of talking about the vision of their company. So where do they want to take their organization or their department? And once you've captured that, so you've articulated the vision, you can turn that into key performance indicators. So you can cascade that vision into drivers that will measure performance against the vision. So you're talking language that an executive or a small business owner is going to love to hear, because you're going to connect employees in the organization with the vision of the owner or a high-level executive. Once you've done key performance indicators in the past, you can use them to predict performance in the future. And when you do that, you can provide visibility to employees about future performance. So in other words, we were showing engineers that a machine was very likely to break down and cause all sorts of problems before the machine broke down. Now, this visibility of seeing mistakes before they happen is where you end up making vast changes to overall company performance. And the most exciting thing is when you're using a workplace innovation tool like Claris, you can build proof of concepts very quickly. And that's kind of the competitive advantage I have over other management consultants, is that whilst they'll be talking about theory and doing PowerPoint slides, I'll be off building a proof of concept using Claris FileMaker, and I can go back very quickly and show a proof of concept of this stuff working to the executives and the managers that were in the boot camp. So after you finish the boot camp, you go off, you build this proof of concept, as quick as you can, and you send that to the leadership team, who then get to review and modify it. And it's very important that you pick the right person as your AI translator. And it was that KW, that knowledge worker in the middle of the diagram. And again, it's probably the person watching this video right now. The person that is going to translate business language from the executives right down to algorithms and formulas that are going to hit the data and bring back answers to those questions. So the chatbot's quite easy and quite cheap. You can get chatbots from Google and lots of other sources now that will translate verbal sentences into text sentences and then translate them into queries. The trick is making sure that you're bringing back the right kind of answers that the leadership team want to hear. So it's that role of the translator that's probably most critical to the success of most projects. Once you've done that though, it's quite an easy step to populate top-level key performance indicators. So you can even just do that using Excel, and in fact most companies might already have that. They might have top-level key performance indicators. What you're doing is connecting those top-level key performance indicators right down to every single transaction in the organization. So that when people are using your Claris FileMaker app, they can drill down from top-level KPIs right down to an individual product or service or employee or sales rep. And once you do that, you can set up a very small footprint where it's looking at the key products and services in the organization, and then you can grow that footprint. And the more companies engage in these solutions, the more they can use machine learning and AI to automatically categorize the information, cluster it, and indeed predict information. So you're organically growing your AI footprint as opposed to shoving it down people's throat. So I think in summary, the way to get started with AI is to remember these three things. Keep it as simple as possible when you start. Make sure it's business driven and not technology driven. And work from the top down. Work from the small business owner, the executives, the managers, and work your way down. Don't work bottom up. That's it for this session. I hope you've enjoyed the rest of Claris Engage, and thanks very much for watching.